They thought it was just a massive grizzly, injured, quiet, and oddly still. 2 hikers spotted him lying by the creek, black fur soaked, breathing shallow. He didn't growl. He didn't run. He just stared. When the rescue team arrived, the vet leaned in to examine the bear. But what he found hidden beneath the bear's massive chest made his face go pale. What was inside him, or rather, under him, would leave everyone in shock. Because this isn't just a story about an animal in pain. It's a story of protection, of sacrifice, of a bond so powerful it will break your heart. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe, like this video, and turn on notifications so we can keep bringing you real stories like this one that prove how deep love can go, even in the wild. The trail was barely marked, one of those forgotten paths near the southern edge of Glacier National Park, where tourists rarely wander and only the locals dare hike after October. But Liam and Casey weren't ordinary hikers. They were wildlife volunteers, trained to monitor movement through remote camera traps and occasionally report any illegal hunting signs. They were halfway through their weekend loop when they saw him. At first, they thought it was a shadow under the trees, but as they got closer to the river bend, the figure didn't move. It was enormous, fur as dark as pitch, soaking wet. A grizzly, unmistakably male, lying on his side, one paw twitching in the snow. Casey instinctively grabbed Liam's sleeve. "Don't move." But the bear didn't react. He was breathing, barely. No growl, no shift. Just the quiet, shallow rise of his chest. Liam pulled out the binoculars. "Something's wrong with him." They waited, whispered, debated. Then, slowly, they backed away and radioed it in. The ranger station was almost 2 hours away. With daylight fading fast, they marked the location and hiked back at double pace. The rescue team arrived just after dark. 2 rangers and a field vet named Dr. Haley Mendez. She had seen wounded bears before, gunshots, traps, infections. But something about the way this bear lay, low to the ground, protective, made her pause. She approached slowly, tranquilizer dart ready. The bear didn't resist, not even when the needle struck. He groaned, then went still. What happened next was something no one expected. As the sedation settled in and the team approached with lights and stretchers, Dr. Mendez knelt to examine his abdomen. That's when she saw the blood. Not the bear's, but something beneath him. She lifted one massive foreleg and gasped. There, tucked against the bear's stomach, was a cub. Tiny, still alive, soaked and shivering, and there was more than one. No one spoke for a long time. The forest, for all its wind and snow, felt suddenly quiet. Dr. Mendez stared at the small body nestled beneath the enormous bear. The cub wasn't moving much, just trembling, its breathing shallow. It wasn't injured, not visibly, just cold, weak, hidden. Then it whimpered, a soft, heartbreaking sound, like it had been holding its voice back until now. The second cub was even smaller, pressed under the bear's chest, covered by fur and mud. She was limp, barely responsive. Dr. Mendez reached in, carefully, cradling the first cub in her arms, while the ranger lifted the bear's front leg. The big male didn't move. His breathing was steady but faint, his sedation just strong enough to keep him calm. "He was protecting them," she whispered. Liam stepped closer. "You think they're his?" "I don't know," Dr. Mendez said. "Male grizzlies usually don't do this. They don't guard cubs. Not like this." She looked down at the tiny faces. "But he did." It took another 10 minutes to fully assess the scene. The cubs were underweight, hypothermic, likely hadn't eaten in over a day. But they were alive. And that was a miracle. The bear, though, was worse. Older than he looked. Deep scratches along his flank, a cracked paw, signs of a fight. But the strange part was the way he had positioned himself, curled just enough to create a wall of warmth around the cubs. It had cost him. They loaded the cubs gently into a heated crate. Then they prepared the stretcher for the big male. When the truck finally rolled away under the beam of headlamps and falling snow, Liam stood in silence, watching the brake lights disappear into the trees. He didn't say it out loud, but he knew what he'd seen. That bear hadn't just stumbled upon the cubs. He had shielded them, chosen to stay, chosen to endure. Back at the Wildlife Center, the night turned into a quiet flurry of activity. Vets warmed fluids. Assistants dried the cubs gently with towels and heating pads. One of them began to suckle from a syringe. The other, the smaller one, didn't move. Dr. Mendez leaned over her, lips tight. "Come on, baby. Just a little more." The larger cub looked toward the room where the big bear had been taken. Its tiny nose twitched, body still curled in fear. But the eyes weren't wild. They were waiting, as if they knew exactly where they belonged. The center was quiet, save for the hum of equipment and the soft, steady breathing of the animals in recovery. The larger cub, now swaddled in blankets and warmed under a heat lamp, had finally taken formula. His tiny paws twitched as he slept. The smaller one, however, was still unresponsive, her body curled tightly as if trying to vanish. Dr. Mendez sat beside her kennel, rubbing gentle circles on her back with 2 fingers, whispering words only meant for the broken-hearted. In the next room, the adult Grizzly, still unconscious, lay on a reinforced table under warm lights. His breathing was shallow but even. The wounds on his side had been cleaned and stitched. The cracked front paw, though, was worse than expected. A deep fracture, likely from blunt trauma. Maybe a fight. Maybe something worse. What none of them could understand yet was why this bear had done what he did. Because no adult male grizzly would do this. Not normally. Not ever. Liam returned the next morning with Casey and a wildlife biologist named Jordan, who specialized in tracking grizzly lineages in the region. He had been following bear movements through collar GPS and trail cams for over 3 years. When he saw the bear in recovery, he went pale. "I know this one," Jordan said quietly. He pulled out his laptop, opened a folder marked Sector B, and found a series of images. Trail cam footage from the past summer. The same bear appeared in multiple shots, scarred muzzle, distinct fur pattern around the shoulders, always alone. "We tagged him 4 years ago. Locals called him Bramble. He lost a mate in a mudslide. Since then he's been reclusive, never aggressive, just wandering." Dr. Mendez frowned. "So he had a mate?" Jordan nodded. And she was with cubs when she died. Casey leaned in. You think these are her cubs? I'd bet everything. They all stared at the bear through the glass. Bramble, the lone giant, had spent the last few years drifting alone through valleys and ridgelines, keeping to himself. Now, suddenly, he had reappeared, with 2 starving cubs hidden beneath him. He hadn't found them by chance. He had gone looking for them. And when he found them, alone, cold, too small to survive, he did what no one expected of him. He became their shelter, even if it broke him, even if it cost him everything. That night, the smaller cub moved for the first time. She didn't cry, didn't whimper. She simply lifted her tiny head and turned toward the glass wall separating her from the next room. Bramble was still unconscious, but the connection was alive, and the waiting had only begun. The first thing Bramble did when he opened his eyes was try to stand. It wasn't instinct. It was fear. Urgency. His massive limbs twitched, claws scraping weakly at the floor, as if he had forgotten where he was and thought he was still in the woods, still shielding something beneath him. Dr. Mendez rushed into the recovery room, hands raised in calm warning. Easy, boy. You're safe now. But Bramble wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the glass wall, through it, to the other side, to the cubs. One of the wildlife techs, Ava, whispered from the observation room. He's not trying to leave. He's looking for them. The big bear slumped slightly, eyes wide and darting between the corners of the room. The bandaged paw twitched. He let out a sound, not a roar or a growl, but something low and breathy, almost like a cough, but laced with a sorrow that made everyone stop moving. Dr. Mendez leaned toward the window. He's calling them. The larger cub heard it first. He rose slowly from the blanket and wobbled toward the far end of his kennel, placing both front paws on the glass. The smaller one followed a moment later, still weak, but awake now, alive and drawn to that sound. The center's policy forbade any direct contact between cubs and adult males unless part of a monitored rehabilitation program. But this wasn't ordinary wildlife behavior. This was something else. By midday, the decision was made. A supervised enclosure would be prepared, a large naturalistic pen built behind the center with cameras and climbing logs, snow, and access to warmth. The team didn't know how much longer Bramble had. His lungs were weak, his body failing, but he had lived for those cubs. And they were starting to live for him. That evening, under soft clouds and falling snow, Bramble was gently wheeled into the outdoor pen. He stood, shaky, towering, regal, and sniffed the air. Then he turned as the kennel doors opened behind him. The cubs burst out. At first, there was hesitation. They blinked at the open space, looked up at the sky. Then they saw him. The bigger one ran. The smaller one stumbled, but followed. And when they reached Bramble, there was no fear, no confusion. They collapsed into him. He curled around them the way he had in the forest, one great arm draped over both tiny bodies. And for the first time in days, Bramble closed his eyes, not from pain, but peace. Inside the observation room, no one spoke. Even Casey, tough as she was wiped her eyes with a gloved hand. Liam exhaled quietly. He waited. That whole time, he waited. Dr. Mendez only nodded, voice barely a whisper. And now, he can rest. The peace didn't last. For 3 days, Bramble and the cubs remained in the outdoor enclosure, a quiet haven nestled behind the wildlife center. The cubs played more each day, growing bolder, even climbing a small log pile. Bramble never strayed far. He lay near the rock wall, head lifted just enough to watch them, breathe them in, as if each second was something he hadn't believed he'd get. But on the 4th morning, his breathing changed. Dr. Mendez heard it first on the observation feed. A rattle, low and uneven, with pauses that were too long. She rushed outside, boots crunching against the frost, and found Bramble lying on his side, laboring. His eyes opened when she approached. Tired. Glassy. The cubs were pressed against his chest. She crouched down near the fence. Hey. Hang in there. By noon, he couldn't stand. His vital signs were erratic. Blood work showed signs of kidney failure, stress-induced trauma, possible internal infection from the old fight wounds. They'd cleaned what they could, stitched what was visible, but something deeper was unraveling. Jordan paced the hallway. He was holding on for them. It's like, now that they're okay, his body's letting go. Dr. Mendez nodded. It's not just physical. He's been running on instinct. Love, maybe. Whatever it was never about survival. It was about finishing something. The staff had to make a decision. Sedate him again. Begin aggressive treatment. Prolong the inevitable. Or let him stay, here, outside, where the cubs still found him warm and familiar. They debated for hours. Then a call came in from the State Wildlife Commission. The cubs were now healthy enough to be transferred to an approved sanctuary, one where they'd be cared for until they were old enough for a monitored release. But the van would leave at dawn. It was their last night together. Dr. Mendez didn't hesitate. She walked into the enclosure, slow, careful, and sat just feet from the 3 of them. Bramble lifted his head. Barely. She looked at him like she would a soldier, a guardian, a father. You did it, she whispered. They're safe. The cubs stirred in their sleep, curled into his belly fur. The bigger one nuzzled under his leg. The smaller one, stronger now, looked up with sleepy eyes and let out a soft, contented huff. Snow began to fall. Light, gentle, like the forest itself was saying goodbye. Later that night, under a sky full of stars, Bramble stopped breathing. No sounds, no struggle, just stillness. Dr. Mendez found him at sunrise, curled around the cubs one final time. They were awake, confused, but not crying, as if they already knew. The sanctuary was nestled in a quiet corner of the Bitterroot Valley, far from highways and crowds, hidden between 2 ridgelines thick with fir and spruce. It was a place for second chances. When the cubs arrived, they didn't step out of the travel crate right away. The handlers waited, patient and gentle, opening the door and stepping back. It was the bigger one who moved first, sniffing the air cautiously before padding forward, looking behind him as if checking for someone who wasn't there. The smaller cub followed, slower, ears twitching at every sound. They stuck close to one another, never separating by more than a few feet. They didn't cry. They didn't play. Not yet. It was as if a part of them was still frozen in the moment they left Bramble behind. Dr. Mendez didn't accompany the transport. She had stayed behind at the center to oversee Bramble's burial, a simple, dignified resting place on the edge of the woods near where he'd first been found. The team carved no marker. They left only a large stone, uncut and natural, the kind he might have leaned against while watching the cubs in the wild. She visited the pen the next day, alone, and placed a pine branch at the stone's base. "Not many would have done what you did," she said softly. "Even fewer would have done it without ever expecting anything back." Back at the sanctuary, the cubs took time to adjust. Days passed before they began to show signs of curiosity. They explored the edges of the enclosure, climbed a stump, tasted the bark of a fallen log. The handlers kept their distance, letting the cubs set the pace. But every evening, just before dusk, both cubs would return to the same corner of the pen, the one that faced west, toward where the sun set behind the hills, toward where they had last seen him. It became a ritual, and the staff noticed. So one of them, a quiet woman named Rachel, placed a single round stone at that corner, then another beside it, then a third, a silent tribute. By the end of the week, a small mound had formed, not a grave, not a monument, just a memory they could touch. One evening, under a streaked orange sky, the smaller cub lay beside that mound and placed her paw gently on the top stone. No sound, no cry, just stillness and acceptance. That night, for the first time, they played. Not wildly, not for long, but enough to remember what it meant to feel safe again. The kind of safety he gave them, not through strength or force, but by choosing to stay when he could have walked away. And that choice was what saved them. Spring came late that year. The snow took its time melting from the ridges, as if the mountain itself wasn't quite ready to let go. At the sanctuary, the cubs had grown. Their fur was thicker, eyes brighter. They ran now, fast, clumsy, sometimes tumbling over each other like children with too much joy in their bones. But they always returned to the same corner. The stone mound still stood. They never added to it, never disturbed it. But sometimes they would lay near it at dusk, resting their heads quietly, as if waiting for something to rise with the stars. No one told them he was gone, but they had always known. At the Wildlife Center, Dr. Mendez stood at the edge of the clearing where Bramble had been found. The forest was green now. Birds called through the branches. Somewhere in the distance, a deer stepped cautiously through the brush. She carried a worn envelope in her coat pocket, a letter she had written but never mailed. It was addressed to no one. She took it out, read the last few lines silently, and tucked it beneath the same stone she had laid at his resting place weeks earlier. It read, "You reminded me what mercy looks like. Not in humans, not in heroes, but in silence, in sacrifice, in staying. You didn't roar, you didn't fight, you just stayed. And because of that, they lived. Because of that, we remember you." She stood for a while longer, her breath visible in the cold spring air, and then walked back to the center, slow, steady, changed. Back at the sanctuary, the cubs were preparing for their final phase of care, a soft release program deep within protected territory. Not full wildness, not yet, but the next step. A place where they could grow with space, learn the rhythm of the forest, and begin the life that Bramble had never gotten to finish. When the time came, the handlers opened the transport gate. Neither cub hesitated. They stepped out together, pausing only once to look back. Then they disappeared into the trees. Rachel stood with her hand resting on the gate. "You think they'll remember?" Liam, who had come to say goodbye, answered without hesitation. "They already do." Months passed, seasons shifted, and somewhere out in the mountains, 2 young bears walked the ridgelines. They played, they hunted, they grew. But in the quietest hours, just before night fell, they still paused and looked west, toward a memory of a heavy body curled around them in the snow, and the quiet, unspoken love that saved their lives. If this story touched your heart, don't let it stop here. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share this story with someone who believes in the quiet power of love, the kind that doesn't need words, the kind that sacrifices without applause. Because even in the wild, compassion leaves tracks that never fade.